So good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm really delighted to be here this evening. I see so many familiar faces, and it's such a relief, I can say, after 2 years of being online and being restricted to the small tiny windows where we can meet each other in person here finally. So something is changing, and I'm really happy about it. Uh, I must say that I see a lot of new faces, and I think it will only be right to give you a brief background on New Acropolis Culture Circle, which is our department hosting this event this evening, and of course our eminent guest today. So New Acropolis is an international volunteering organization present in more than 60 countries. The organization is run completely on a voluntary basis by volunteers, many of whom are having some responsibility here today, and that's how this entire organization is run. We have more than 50,000 volunteers around the globe, and as I said, we are present in more than 60 countries. What we do is we teach philosophy, but today philosophy is unfortunately sometimes restricted to dusty books on the shelves and becomes a very intellectual subject which can be very intimidating, but which is not what the root of philosophy means. And we try to do and teach philosophy in a more classical manner, which means that make philosophy a part of your life. It just doesn't need to be a theoretical subject, but can really help you take away something essential. And we do this through our three pillars, which is essentially philosophy, or the teachings or classes that we have, culture or cultural activities, and our volunteering activities as well. The New Acropolis Culture Circle, which is the department hosting this event today, is essentially a group belonging to New Acropolis, which helps understand the spiritual essence behind culture and help us understand and touch a little bit of the essence that is there in culture. So culture is not merely for entertainment, but really to enrich the human soul and to what we are today. So we do this through a whole host of specifically curated events. The events are specially for members of the Culture Circle and not for everyone. They're of course open to members of New Acropolis and members of the Culture Circle. So this entire space sometimes becomes a dance floor, a music recital place, and much more. We do walks around the city. We recently had one at Banganga, and I think some of you attended that. So do join us to know more about it. You can talk to one of our volunteers, you can check in on our website and know much more. And then I come here to introduce Dr. Udwadia. Dr. Udwadia has of course been associated with the Breach Candy Hospital as its director for the intensive care unit and several other affiliations with various different hospitals. He's obviously authored many journals and many contributions to national and international publications, and he's written a few books as well, one of which is Tabiyat, which is medicine and healing in India, and other essays, which is I think a brilliant read, and I personally enjoyed it a lot. And Dr. Udwadia was also bestowed with the Padma Bhushan by the Government of India. And without much further ado, Dr. Udwadia, welcome. And again, we're delighted to have you. And we hope to hear some of your insights on this topic around medicine and your thoughts on medicine.
I should speak as I think. And there is some disadvantage in that. The advantage is that there is a certain amount of spontaneity when you do something like this, and it is also a little bit of a challenge to me, and I love to accept challenges. So here you are. I shall speak as my thoughts come. There is no greater saga in the history of man than the epic of medicine. Medicine arose from the mists of magical and empirical beliefs of ancient civilizations. The trail of medicine has had many twists and turns, victories and defeats, periods of scintillating light and darkness. Through 5,000 years of history, recorded history, medicine has become a force, an art, a science, a profession that has made a quantum leap into the present century and will make quantum leap in many centuries to come. I have often asked myself, when was medicine born into this world? And the answer is quite simple. Medicine was born with the awakening of human consciousness. So that when life climbed the ladder of evolution to become human, medicine was there. It was born. And what did medicine consist of then, when it was born, with humans, as we became human? I think medicine then consisted of just one thing, care. You know, the anthropologists and social workers, sociology rather, social sciences, have shown how animals care for each other. And as animals have risen in the evolutionary ladder, how animals care more and more for their young ones and their close ones. So that is what medicine was about. Care of their immediate family, care of their clan, care of their tribe, and care of their community. And amazingly, when medicine started with care, it still has care as its pulsating beat, its pulsating heart. It is that important in medicine today as it was in yesteryears. What is medicine? Is the first question that one would ask. In general, what is medicine? Medicine really is a study of man. Man in its various aspects. Man in relation to the environment. Man being part of nature, as so many of the sages, hundreds and thousands of years, have said. Amazingly, you might find it strange, but medicine is related to history. I'll tell you why. Toynbee, Arnold Toynbee, a great historian who's no longer there now, defined history as a study of civilization. And you could not have civilization without humanity, without humankind. Therefore, history is a study of mankind. And medicine is a study of man. Nobody put it as succinctly as a poet who said, the proper study of mankind is man. Now, you would like to know, in Western medicine, how medicine began. Medicine began with philosophy. It was Pythagoras. Some of you at least must remember the Pythagoras' theorem, do you?
Yes.
Yes, that if you have a right angle triangle, the square of the hypotenuse is equal to the sum of the squares of the two sides of the right angle. Right? Pythagoras was in Samoa, one of the Greek islands, and that time it was not a democratic island like Athens was. It was ruled by a dictator called Polycrates. And Pythagoras wished to run away from that island because he couldn't stand the tyranny of Polycrates. So he went away to the southern part of Italy, right close to the heel of Italy, and founded what is called the Italic School. And he gathered around him like people like him, people with interests akin to him. And he was the first man to use the word philosophy. And what was philosophy according to him when he started? It was the study of man. Again. It was the study of man in his various ways, the study of health. Why should a man, when is a man healthy, when is a man not healthy, why should a man be diseased, where does man come from, where does he go? Everything that related to man. And that was, believe you me, the root of numerous branches in human endeavor, including medicine. Now, you must remember that medicine doesn't exist within itself, alone, isolated, at all. The panorama of medicine is really just not the discoveries and events that occurred in the world in chronological order. No. The romance of medicine really lies in the cavalcade of the great men and women who have trod its trail. Heroes and impostors, the caring and the uncaring. I feel that there is no other endeavor, human endeavor, other than medicine, which has been influenced by so many factors. Medicine, for example, has been influenced, as I said, by philosophy, by religion, by economics, by sociology, by geography, by art and culture, by wars and conflicts, by natural disasters, and by the rise and fall of civilizations. So a physician, therefore, who is really aware of the history of the world, aware, he doesn't have to be an expert at that at all, aware of the history of the world and aware of the numerous influences that have affected the course of medicine, I think becomes far better to be able to understand the patient who's entrusted to his care. He looks at medicine much more holistically. He doesn't treat individual organs or organ systems, but treats the patient as a whole. He cultivates a greater compassion, a greater empathy for the patient he looks after. And he has a much greater rapport with the patient. He's able to build a bond with this patient, what we call the doctor-patient bond, which really lies at the very, very heart of medicine. History is just part of humanity, as is economics, as is so many others, is religion, philosophy, and what have you. So a doctor or a physician who has even a passing knowledge of this will understand human nature much better. And if he understands human nature much better, he will understand his patient much better. And therefore, he will treat his patient much better. This is how it goes. Now, talking of my days as a doctor, my days as a doctor, in college and subsequently in places where I studied and worked, were great. A lot of study, of course. After work in the hospital, very, very, very busy hospital, like the KM hospital. Studying till perhaps 3 o'clock or 4 o'clock in the morning, getting up at 7:30 and being in the wards at 8:30 and doing that for a number of years, staying awake sometimes for 48 or 72 hours on your feet. In those days, when we had 40 patients in the male ward, 15 patients in the female ward, there was no pediatrics at that time, and another 10 patients in the pediatric ward, and 36 admissions on an emergency day. That's what life was, but it was fun. Plus we had a lot of work, we had a lot of fun. So when we had a lot of fun, we had work during the day and we played it up till 4 o'clock in the morning when we had fun. They were lovely days. Those were the days, I'm afraid, they won't come back again. But we treasure their memory, those of us who were there at that point in time. Now it's amazing, when I compare medicine at that time and what it is now. At that time, we had to use our eyes, our ears and hands all the time. There was very little in the way of investigation, just the basic routine blood tests. There was very little imaging, just the X-ray machine, where you could take an X-ray of the chest, X-ray of the head, and swallow some barium and do a barium study and see how your gut worked, and that's all. But what is medicine like today? It is almost as if in the last 70 years or so, medicine has worked miracles. You have transplants of almost all organs in the body except the brain. Really all organs of the body except the brain. You have numerous drugs to counter numerous ailments, to fight infection. We had just one or two in those days and that age of time. And medicine has really worked miracles, no question about that. Everyone knows that, and everyone agrees on that. But there is a strange thing. There is a fair amount of antagonism against the medical profession and against doctors as well in today's world. You will say, why do you say that? Well, look at the amount of litigation against doctors. Look at the fact when a patient dies in a hospital, they sometimes burn the hospital down, beat up the doctors, beat up the nurses. It's just not in India. It may be more violent in India, but this antagonism is there almost all over the world. Isn't that a strange paradox? The paradox is remarkable because in the 60s or 70s, even up to that time, when science had not really achieved nothing like what it has done right now, the profession was held in the highest regard and the doctor's reputation was second to none. And today, when science and technology hold medicine in a tight embrace, and when science has achieved so much, indeed when it has really done and brought great benefit to mankind, it's true, there's no question about it, in any way, in every way. Yet the profession is not regarded as well as it was. And in some places, the reputation of the physician has sharply plummeted. Why is that so? I feel it is so because somewhere along the way, medicine has lost its path. It has strayed from its path. It's the mechanization of medicine, its hubris and its technology, the hubris of its science and technology has robbed medicine of its art, has robbed medicine of its raison d'etre, reason for being there. So that the doctor now is concerned more with the machines that surround him than his patients. And funnily enough, He has also made the patient more close to the machine than to himself, than to the doctor. The machine, therefore, is the intermediary between the doctor and the patient. And that indeed is a very sad thing. So that the student of today, and I've taught so many students over the last 50, 60 years, the student of today, and even the doctor of today, including consultants of today, are more concerned with looking at various organ systems within the patient and not ministering to the patient as a whole. The patient as a whole, the patient who houses these organs is forgotten and often pushed into the background. The physician and the student is rather, in these days of burgeoning science, these years of burgeoning science, is more concerned with the newer technicalities of medicine. But medicine is taught and learnt at the bedside by listening to the patient, by talking and speaking to the patient, by touching him, examining him carefully. Not just from books, not just from gleaming machinery or gleaming machines and sophisticated gadgetry, not just from being enamored by the lovely pictures thrown up by scans, by angiograms, by ultrasounds, and by all modern aspects that have come into medicine today. Make no mistake, science and technology are great. Without science and technology, where would we be today? It is science and technology which has catapulted medicine into the 21st, 22nd century and will do so for many centuries on. But what I'm trying to say is that there is much more to medicine than science and technology. Technology, for example, can never take a good history from a patient, can it? Nor can technology examine the patient carefully, meticulously, as one should. Nor can technology ever soothe the anxiety of relatives of patients who are so ill and might die. Nor can they handle patients and tell them to be brave and cope with the problems they have and urge them to fight and live. Technology cannot do that. You know, it was said long back by many physicians that medicine is as much a science as an art, as much an art as a science. What is the art of medicine? It's difficult to define in words the art of medicine. It's rather nebulous, if I may say. Well, for one thing, the art of medicine is intrinsically mixed with its science. It's difficult to separate. You cannot quantify the art of medicine. It has no measurable qualities. I think the art of medicine are the qualities of the heart and the mind, which, if I may so, vibrate in empathy with the sick patient and thereby promote healing. That is what is the art of medicine. And unfortunately, it is this art of medicine which has now been put into the shadows, in the background. It is a forgotten art. And I only hope it doesn't become a lost art. What a tragedy if that be so for both man and medicine. Now, in practical terms, really speaking, if you ask all that, you say, but tell me, how do you practice the art of medicine? First and foremost, by taking a good history. Very often, when I am stunned as to what is happening to the patient, I go back and talk to him again. And there might be just an offside remark from the patient which might be extremely important, which I had missed before, and which gives me a clue as to what is happening. You know, a disease never manifests itself in the same way in two individuals. That's the remarkable part of medicine. Therefore, it has never been an exact science. For various reasons, one person may manifest the same disease in one way and another in a completely different way. That is also its beauty. That is also its challenge. Very often, a good physician is also a good detective. As I always say, the spider spins his web. And then comes examination, close, meticulous examination, where you use your eyes and ears and hands and come to a reasonable conclusion as to what the matter is. And then comes, of course, your investigations, which should be to the point, not from A to Z, or only what that is relevant. And finally, your conclusion as to what the patient has. And perhaps the most important aspect of a good physician is judgment. Clinical judgment. I think judgment is something which a physician has from the beginning, perhaps born with, if I may say so, but doesn't have it. You cannot equate judgment with intelligence or knowledge. I've known people very knowledgeable, very intelligent, but poor judgment. And I've known people who are ordinary people, commonsensical physicians with excellent judgment. So judgment is an extremely important feature for a good physician. I'd like to dwell a little on the ethics of medicine, but that is so important. What is medical ethics? I would define medical ethics as moral obligations that govern the practice of medicine. Moral gives you the idea, right or wrong, good or bad. It's very important, however, in medicine to realize that what may be one moral obligation at a particular time, in a particular patient, may come into conflict with an equally important and serious moral obligation, different from the first one, in a given circumstances, in the same patient. I think ethics is rooted in philosophy, in religion, and social customs. And you will realize that these are different in different communities, different civilizations, different parts of the world. Therefore, it's impossible to have a common code of ethics in medicine. Impossible. But by and large, all civilized societies have a reasonable concept of what is right and what is wrong. And that, I think, is the most important aspect in the ethics of medicine. The principal, most important aspect in the ethics of medicine is being beneficent to the patient. What is the meaning of beneficence? Beneficence is doing good to the patient. And how do you do good to the patient? First of all, you need competence. How can you be beneficent if you are not reasonably competent? But it's not just competence that matters, not alone. It also involves mental qualities. Your ability to be able to humane to the patient. It involves humanity or humanism. And how would I define that? I would define that as the quality that enables a physician to understand and feel for the suffering, pain, discomfort of a patient, so that he tries his best to remove it or remedy it as best as he can. This is as important, I think, as is competence. You need competence, but competence has to be allied to humanity. And the opposite of beneficence is maleficence. Maleficence is harm to the patient. Primum non nocere was the Hippocratic sentence, which meant, first of all, do no harm. Now that's not easy, because as you know, every medicine has side effects. There is no medicine, there not even water. If you drink gallons of water, you die. If you drink gallons of milk, you would die. Every medicine has a side effects. So what do you do? And there was a beautiful judgment, I think it was Justice Denning in England, who made a remarkable judgment which has stood the test of time, and which has stood the test of time, and which has come to be a standard landmark in the management of patients who unfortunately are taken further ill by what the doctor is trying to do. This is a patient who was in great pain. He was an elderly man, and the doctor said he would like to relieve his pain and gave him morphine, which in those days was the only substance which could relieve pain. And after giving morphine, the patient stopped breathing and he died. One of the effects of morphine is to depress breathing, and particularly in elderly individuals, and some elderly individuals much more than in others. So that the son filed a suit against the doctor, and this learned judge said that no, the doctor is not at fault. His intention was to relieve pain, and in the process of doing that, something happened which he did not anticipate. And he did it with good intent. So this is called the double effect of a drug. A drug which can do good and has the potential to do harm, and sometimes with strong drugs, even the potential to kill. So this is the meaning of malfeasance, and to remember that sometimes with all the care in the world, what the physician does sometimes does harm, even when he has the intent to do good. So beneficence, malfeasance, and then the most important, autonomy. It is the patient who should decide whether what the doctor wants him to do is up to his liking or not. He may say, I might not want this, I don't want this. The doctor has to listen to him. Or he might say, I don't want this test, this investigation, this invasive procedure, please, I don't want it, please don't do it. He has the right to refuse it. That's patient autonomy. But for an autonomous decision to be truly autonomous, the individual who's making that decision, if it is contrary to the advice of the doctor, has to really have his own interests truly at heart. He must have made this decision after proper thought, after critical thinking. If he has made it just like that in a fit of anger or fury, that is not really truly autonomous. But great decisions in medicine come as a result of a balance between beneficence and autonomy. You want to do good to the patient, and the patient says, it's my turn to say what I want and what I want. And there is often a conflict between beneficence and autonomy. Let me give you just two actual examples. A young man in his early 20s, or not early, close to his 30s, 25, 26 years old, totally cyanosed, almost pulseless, but still compos mentis, agitated, angry, that he was brought to the hospital. He had a bad pneumonia, and he urgently needed. I won't talk in technical terms, he was blue, he was cyanosed because of lack of oxygen. He urgently needed to be ventilated by a machine. When explained to do so, he had a child, he had a wife. When explained to do so, he refused. I don't like hospitals. I've never been in a hospital. I hate machines and I don't like doctors. I tried my best to explain to him. All his wife, she tried to explain to him. She understood the gravity of this. No, he said, I will not have it. I said, I have to do that. You will die if I don't do this. Please let me do this. And you might live if you do this. Please, for your wife's sake, child's sake. No, I said. I have a right to refuse it. I said, to hell with you. I just had my registrar put him to sleep and give him an injection, knocked him out completely. With great difficulty, we inserted a tube. Put him on the machine. It was a touch and go affair for the wretched time that was wasted, but ultimately we salvaged him. He goes home, walks out of the hospital, and says, thank you very much, doctor. Thank you. And distributes sweets to the nurses. There is an example of a gap between beneficence and autonomy. Another example, a medical student whom I taught in college, is brought in almost dead with a note saying, under no circumstances am I to be resuscitated. She had obviously taken a poison and said, under no circumstances I was to be resuscitated. We just ignored her. We resuscitated her. She lived. Again, plaudits to the unit. Sweets distributed once again. Again, you see, the antagonism sometimes between beneficence and autonomy. So you see, when you make an autonomous decision, particularly in a crisis, fear, anxiety, stress, panic, dislike for hospitals, machines, doctors, all come into play. And the decision, therefore, is not truly autonomous. Autonomous decision requires critical thinking. So in an emergency, when there is a conflict between beneficence and autonomy, I think you should take the side of beneficence. In an emergency, because in a cold case, where there is time to think for the patient, where he can consult anybody, I'd say you should do this, but you don't agree. Why don't you think over it? Go and ask people, go to other doctors and see what they say, then come and make up your mind. And if you still say, I won't take radiation for this, I will not take it. That's a different story. What are the other important features of it? The third most important feature is justice. What do you mean by justice? If you mean by justice that you do the best that you can, and if you can't do the best that you can, you do the least harm that you possibly can, and the best good that you possibly can. I give you an example. For example, when we started the tetanus ward at the GJ Hospital, and there were 12 beds, and we managed to get 4 breathing machines. And when there were these all 12 people convulsing at the same time together, it's a dreadful disease. And I had 3 machines. Now, who do I use these 3 machines on? I say, I would like to have at least 8 machines because 8 of them need the machine. So I choose the 3 people who are the worst off and use them, knowing full well that tomorrow, one of those others whom I have not put the machine on will be worse than the ones that I have here. Don't worry. We were fortunate, however, at that time, in that critical part of my life, critical period of my life, at the Beach County Hospital, when I approached them, said they would take on all patients who were very bad and treat them free of charge. They wouldn't do that now, of course. But they did that once upon a time. That was the magnanimity of the hospital at that point in time. So that is how we got out of that squeeze. So you have justice. What else? Communication. It's so important to communicate with your patient. It is so important to tell him exactly what is happening to him. Of course, in a way that doesn't make him panic and worry. It is so important to tell him what you plan to do and why you plan to do. It's so important to tell him why you don't want to do something and do something. You make the patient your ally in his battle against disease. And that indeed is a great thing. It's a great thing. And there comes in faith, because when you do that, the patient has faith in you. And believe you me, in a very ill individual, educated, uneducated, such very ill individuals literally have antennae that make out a physician who truly cares from a physician who pretends to care. Great faith, a great bond is built between the doctor and the patient. And the doctor and the patient bond is really, truly the pulsatile heart of medicine. And it's important to also communicate with the relatives. Tell them exactly what is happening. No punches pulled. Exactly. The bare truth, the absolute truth. It's so important. If you do that, the relatives are on your side. And you're not likely to be sued. And finally, you communicate with yourself. And how do you communicate with yourself? I communicate with myself by writing reams of notes on very ill people. What I have done, why have I done this? Why have I not done that and I have done this? What are my reasons for this? What do I anticipate? For one thing, it clarifies my puzzled thoughts. I sometimes come across something, maybe I should have done this at this point in time. And also, it is a superb way to prevent yourself from being harassed legally. Because here you are, just shows that the man is cared for the patient. What else can anyone can make a mistake? If you're human, you're bound to make mistakes. Haven't I made mistakes? Of course I have mistakes. They've kept me awake through the night. And I think I have made mistakes. So that's communication. Next thing is charity. A doctor should never refuse a patient who cannot pay. And my colleagues tell me they'll all come to you. And no, I said, they don't all come to me. A few come and it's perfect. I don't have to worry at all. A great man, guess his name, I think I'll get it later, who wrote the book Religio Medici. I forget the name. When he said, do not enter the temple of science with the soul of a moneylender. Beautiful. I think every doctor should remember that sentence. So charity is another thing. Confidentiality is so important. You shouldn't talk about your patient to anybody else. You should be careful. There are some sly ones who try to get information out of you. Confidentiality. And what else? Protection of human rights. She raised her hand saying that it's time to stop.
She's 5 minutes early.
Really?
Yeah. So maybe that was just okay.
Okay. So confidentiality, and I said protection of human rights. You know, there is a Geneva Convention on the protection of human rights and the genome. This is important. Because modern medicine is tampering with the genome. The convention said that you should, research that you do should be direct on the genome, should be directed solely towards alleviating the suffering of patients and nothing else. But that's not so now. The research that is done on the genome is related to altering the in some such way that the human race can be altered. You see, we have evolved through millions of years through genetic drift and Darwinian selection. The scientists want us now, and we've come to this stage through millions of years. And if we wait and continue like this, who knows, in this fashion, in this manner, millions of years from now, we will be different. But this is in the natural order. The scientists say that what they will do, what nature can do in millions of years, we can do in hundreds of years, or perhaps 1,000 years. We can so alter the genome of the human being, that he might have qualities which you can never otherwise possess. You can perhaps be so conditioned as to fly to Mars or to Venus or to any planet. You would be able to withstand all temperatures, very hot, very cold. We can do that for you by tampering the genome. It's a sad thing if that really happens. It's a sad thing if human beings are part machines, semi-machines, or total machines even for that matter. Reminded of the words of Winston Churchill. If that indeed happens, we might enter into a real dark age, darker than ever before in the history of man. Made even more horrendous by the perversity of science. It's worth remembering that. God alone knows how the future of the world is going to be. I am now going to just use the last part of my sentence, which Shirin has asked me to stop, and say, what are the qualities of a good physician? Competence, of course. Humanity, of course. Charity, of course. Judgment, of course. Honesty and integrity, of course. Is there anything I've left out? Maybe I have. But one thing comes to my mind: equanimity. Equanimity, said Sir William Osler, he called it equanimitas. That's the Latin for equanimity. What does equanimity mean? Being cool, unruffled in times of great stress. Being able to think logically, correct judgment when you are pushed to the wall. Being able not to be stressed. Most of all, not to show emotions of anxiety, worry in a desperate life and death situation in front of the patient. Most important of all, not to have fear shown. On the contrary, to be so cool, so calm, so steady, so unruffled, that the patient can draw courage from the way you behave at this critical juncture of his life. That is the meaning of equanimity. Some are born with equanimity. Some, like me, have learned to acquire equanimity. The person who I know was born with equanimity was my dearest dad. He was a general practitioner who was born with equanimity. Not a flicker in his eyes, whatever it is. But even if you are not born with equanimity, even if within you you are torn to bits, to shreds, you must learn not to show it. For it is only then that the patient can derive the support that he needs at this juncture of his life. Let me end by a beautiful quote from Maimonides, who was a Jewish doctor in the Middle East. many, many years ago. I think he was the man who gave the first description of bronchial asthma. By the way. This is what he said. Let me treat my patient, a fellow creature, in pain and in distress, with great humanity. Let me never ever consider him as merely a vessel filled with disease. Thank you.